Ladies and gentlemen, today I found the most hysterical, most long winded effort post by a liberal melting down on the timeline. With about 1 million views, this guy, Michael Podhazard, is ostensibly trying to disprove Trump's electoral college victory, but more importantly, he's basically denying that Trump even won the popular vote, and he has a good 20-page summary as to why. Let's actually debunk this. Just to get a taste of what we're in for today, he has comprehensive models that are supposed to be like these like 4D chess Albert Einstein level analyses of different voting counts. Again, he's pulling up different examples. He's for whatever reason looking at 1985 Red Sox versus Yankees charts to kind of prove his point. And so we're really delving into the mind of a madman. Let's get into it. So if you pay attention, you'll notice that right off the bat, he'll say that Trump won the popular vote in quotes. Now, he cannot even admit that Trump won the popular vote despite Trump winning it by millions of votes. Now, reason number one is apparently Trump's candidacy was only viable because of the justices he appointed to the Supreme Court. He apparently disabled the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment, which otherwise should have barred him from holding office, and two, shielded him from standing trial before the election for trying to overturn the 2020 results or for hoarding classified documents, which would have kept his criminality in full view for the electorate and possibly rendered his candidacy a non-starter due to a jail sentence or a lack of support. In another country, we would understand this as a part of an autocratic takeover, not a democratic victory. So think about this. He's trying to overpower the will of the people who, again, voted more for Trump than they did for Kamala Harris on the basis that, as a technicality is concerned, the 14th Amendment should have barred him from being president or running for it in the first place. Then he's also saying that he should have been imprisoned prior to this whole thing happening also. So he's using the lawfare technique. He's using the whole Jan 6 narrative. Are we surprised yet? But it gets crazier. So when we talk about the MAGA mandate, we're talking about Donald Trump sweeping the swing states like I predicted, winning the popular vote like I predicted. And so that is something that has not happened in about 20 years, where you have a president like Bush in that case in the reelection in '04, where he wins the popular vote and solidifies a mandate. And Donald Trump is supposed to embrace it, obviously, as we need change. That's what people voted for. But this guy's coping. The spin he has here is that it's really understood, Trump's victory, that is, as a vote of no confidence in Democrats and not an embrace of Trump or MAGA. Now, that might seem like, okay, yeah, maybe a lot of people that don't like Trump voted for Trump's economy, voted against the Kamala craziness, and that is a valid point. But my rebuttal to that would be, then how come in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, so many candidates that were left of Trump, that were more establishmentarian, got fewer votes than Donald Trump did? If people were really voting against the Democrat regime and not for Donald Trump, then how the hell did Donald Trump do better in Pennsylvania than Bob Casey's opponent McCormick in that state? Or in the case of Michigan, where Mike Rogers, again, a pretty standard fare Republican, got less votes than Donald Trump did in the state. Again, if you're voting just because the economy sucks or Democrats suck and you're not voting for Trump, then you would expect people down ballot to do better than Trump in a lot of cases. Of course, that wasn't what happened. Okay, now the craziness ramps up with these statements. So apparently, he claims the popular vote result was almost entirely a collapse in support for Harris and Democrats, not an increase of support for Trump and MAGA. Trump was no more popular than he was 4 years ago, while Harris significantly underperformed Biden in 2020. So both things can be true and false at the same time. What do I mean? His two statements here are ridiculous, but mine are going to be both correct. Watch. So, first of all, yes, Donald Trump was more popular in 2024 than he was in 2020. Anyone with a brain knows. I'm a college student. I was around for years. Obviously, I'm a senior, so I wasn't around for 2020. But I can promise you that Trump nowadays is a lot more favorably viewed than he was even 2 or 3 years ago. That's just a given. You know, he didn't get on Joe Rogan in 2020. He definitely would have jumped at the chance. He did in 24 because, again, he was more popular. On the other hand, did Kamala Harris underperform Biden? Yes. But even then, I would suggest that Biden's popularity was not even that. It was an anti-Trump vote, which is understandable. But Biden, again, wasn't that strong of a candidate in 2020. He was pretty much the most generic possible option, and add in aging as a variable there. When it comes to Kamala, again, she did underperform Biden, but not by this insane amount. It's more that Trump did better and she did a little worse. But it's not at all what this guy's claiming. Now, this is also nuts. Most of Harris's losses were due to anti-MAGA surge voters staying home. She lost the most ground in deep blue urban areas where the dangers of a second Trump administration seemed the most remote. About 19 million Americans who cast a ballot for Biden in 2020 did not vote in 24. Now, that is really stupid because there's a couple reasons actually, and I'll start with one. So, for example, you take a deep blue area that went more Republican. This guy's claiming that the people that hate Donald Trump thought that, oh, well, I live in Atlanta. Oh, I live in I live in LA. I don't have to vote for Kamala because I'm safe from the Trump administration. But if that's the case, then how come those same people still voted for Biden in 2020? Because think about it. Donald Trump in 24 was not more liberal than he was in 2020. Like, he had a more right wing campaign, a more explicitly anti immigration platform, in my opinion. So, any liberal that hated Trump in 2020 and voted for Biden, how come they didn't vote for Kamala in 24? They had every reason to. And this guy's claiming, well, they weren't threatened by MAGA. But if that's the case, then why did they vote against Trump in 2020 then? Like, it doesn't really carry over logically. So, Michael Podhazzer has this all wrong. But then also, keep in mind this. Trump did better in urban areas also because of minority support, not even white people. Just that in Atlanta, for instance, Detroit, lots of black young men voted more Republican than usual, Hispanics all over the place. Think about it. In this part of the article, this guy, Michael, goes into some tangent about the Red Sox versus the Yankees in 1985. I'm not joking. I wasn't kidding about this. We're getting references to Bill Buckner. Who the hell is that? So we're skipping over this part. Now, this is interesting, and this really just gets to the point of him being so stupid, this guy. Because when you look at it, he obviously points out that the American electorate swung 6 points more Republican. What I mean is that Trump lost the popular vote to Biden officially by 4.5 points, whereas he won the popular vote this time by 1.5. That's a 7.1 million vote share differential. So basically, he's saying that Democrats lost all 6 points. Trump didn't gain anything, which is ridiculous. Again, Trump's approval was matter of factually higher in virtually every single poll as compared to 4 years ago. That's obvious. Trump had a negative approval rating of at least -3 to like -10, depending on who you ask in 2020. You look at his approval rating in 2024, it was close to about even and neutral, which again is really high for Trump. Most of his presidency, he had an approval rating of about 45 points, more or less, 47 on a good day. And so for him to be at that number as a bottom, as a floor, and his ceiling being 52% or something, it kind of shows that, yeah, he did gain support, not that Democrats lost all of it. Let's address this man's next cope. He says that Trump's swing was historically low for a change election. Of the 14 presidential change elections since 1920, the smallest swings have happened in the 21st century. And Trump's two swings are the two smallest in terms of eligible voters and third smallest and smallest in terms of two-party vote. It is also worth noticing how much smaller the swings are in terms of the eligible vote share. Now, to parse this through in layman terms, what he's basically accusing Trump of is by not winning enough given it's a change election. Now, if you know anything about America, is that we know that with polarization as a political concept, we deal with a situation in which we find ourselves picking between a president and seeing that margin being within a few points either way in a series of different swing states. Again, we have 50 states, which ones are really competitive. This election, it was what, 7? Okay, well, there's 7 swing states out of 50. You can see how the on paper impressiveness of a victory has to be gauged by the margin of which you win in understanding how narrow of a victory you can really achieve and how much even a narrow victory on paper like Trump's was this time is actually pretty astounding. Now, the reason why I tell you this is like in boxing. In boxing, when there's split decisions, oftentimes guys will win the round 117 to 115, 108 to 107, but yet a victory is a victory, and you don't kvetch about how the points were kind of close in a boxing match. Similar to that, of course, America is super diverse now. In 1960, when the country was like 80% of one group, of course, then you could have more rapid shifts because there was a more homogeneous population. But now that we have different minorities that are growing, we have different vested interests. And so when you can bank a lot of minority vote for Democrats, especially prior to 24, you can see that the elections were getting closer because, again, the majority of people that would swing either way, like in 1984, again, these folks are mostly whites and they're more variable in the way they vote. Black people or Hispanics or whatever are less variable depending on how you view it. Now, what do I mean exactly? So again, in 2 sentences, I believe that if Trump were to run against Kamala somehow in 1980, he would win by closer to Reagan margins than he did this time because the demographics of the country were different and they were more holistically friendly to the Republican Party. But again, with diversity, with demographic change, the way that Republicans win will become more and more narrow of a possibility because, again, demographic minorities tend to vote liberal on average. Now, 2024 bucks the trend, which is why it's so impressive. He got the Hispanic vote somehow to shift very Republican, relatively speaking. And so what that basically means is that Donald Trump found a niche for Republicans to win. Because the way that the demography of America works is that if nothing else changes, we're going to take in, 1 million immigrants that are going to vote like 2/3 Democrat. And then we're on track to, of course, if Democrats take power, legalize the tens of millions of illegals in America now. And you can only expect things to get worse for Republican electoral odds going forward if they were to stay in power. So when Trump barely wins the popular vote by, let's say, 2%, and he wins all the 7 swing states, that's still pretty damn good. Because, again, what is the ceiling? His ceiling really only is 50% approval. Also, to glaze Trump and sweep it up for him, think about it. In the 1980s, you could have expected the media to be a lot more even handed in coverage. Therefore, you could see things swap and change when it comes to polling leads. Michael Dukakis apparently had the lead in the summer of '88, I believe, over George H.W. Bush of about 17%. That lead was. And obviously, that doesn't exist anymore, even during Obama and McCain, because the media is now, in a certain extent, polarizing the electorate already. And mind you, this also. McCain, by all means, was going to get destroyed in 2008 because obviously the economy sucked. George Bush was very hated, and McCain didn't really have a charisma to him, in my opinion. But I'm young also. So basically, you would have expected Obama, who was articulate, whatever, likable, to win 70-30, just like logically on that basis. Of course, the election was much closer, and McCain got over 40% of the popular vote against a really popular Democrat and with a very crappy deck of cards that he had, hand of cards. And I only point this out as an example because, again, the polarization in the country makes it so that no matter how cruddy the other candidate is, they're going to still get close to half of the vote. So for Trump to win at all is still really impressive. In fact, most Republicans that had Trump winning had Trump losing the popular vote. I was ballsy enough to get it completely correct because I'm me. Now we get from crazy coping to basically just whining and complaining. Michael Hodster here is saying external factors heavily favor Trump. So now he's kvetching about the inflation rate or whatever else. And to that, I'll just tell you that that's the problem with the Democrats. Because you could say, well, the economy sucked, therefore Kamala lost. It's like, well, then who was the vice president for said bad economy? Again, did McCain catch any sort of break from the Republican recession under George Bush, despite the fact that he was not even in the administration? He wasn't George Bush's VP. He wasn't a Secretary of Defense or anything. He was a senator from Arizona, far away from DC. Okay, my point being is that you're going to get branded a certain way. And you could say that's unfair, and to an extent it is. But in this case, I doubt it really was the case that, oh, Kamala would have done things differently. In fact, I think she would have done worse than Biden when it comes to managing the economy starting in 21. And so really the inflation's the Democrats' fault. And you could really say that, oh, well, Trump okayed $6 trillion of COVID spending, and a lot of it was unnecessary, and I disagree with that. But also keep in mind that, dealing with the virus in 2020 was a much more gray area related matter because you didn't know what the lethality rate was, how bad it was going to be, how long of a lockdown you should do, if one at all, how to control the public hysteria, etc. Whereas with Biden, he had the foresight of, again, having the vaccines available by the time he was president, but then also being able to open up the economy if he wanted to. Yet he, for months, stalled it out and did this whole mask regime thing. And he had one or two more COVID spending bills that were at that point completely unnecessary, unlike with Trump, where you could argue it either way. And that totally added to the debt more than you would have anticipated. Okay, now this is kind of funny. Now he's basically pointing out that incumbent governments worldwide have suffered losses. Like 80% of the countries that had elections last year had the incumbent party, like the Democrats in that case, of America, lose. And so now he's saying, well, everybody else lost.